We are very excited to have you all here. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jason Foster. I'm the CEO of Biotech and one of the co-hosts for the evening. Thank you very much for spending some time with us this evening. We have this panel of beautiful people to talk about the issues of the day. We also have a special guest, second panel to come up as well. We're going to hear from a patient who has had cell therapy. Tell us about his journey, so that's going to be really exciting. A little dessert on the end of the session. So today we're going to talk about the success blueprint for CGT and the way this panel sees how to get from where we are today to where we'd like to be. And I think everyone in this room does it and is involved in this area in particular to ensure that patients get the incredible impact that these therapies can have. No matter where you are, if you're a CDMO, if you're a technology provider, if you're a therapy developer, if you're an academic, we're all here for the benefits that patients can get. And the benefits that cell therapies offer are incredible and unique in many ways. Curative therapies that can cure often intractable diseases. But as we all know, the clinical benefit from a population perspective has been lower than we would have liked. We're not treating that many patients. We've treated less than 5% of the available patient population with the approved therapies. And so we're going to explore potentially how we change the tide on that as the next generation of therapies come to clinical trials, as they come to patients, because ultimately that's the end. That's the measuring stick of success, is how many patients get successfully treated with these therapies. As we were sort of alluding to a minute ago, you have incredibly efficacious therapies that show incredible clinical promise, but we have a couple things holding the industry back. One is commercial viability. We know that drug development is expensive, it takes a long time. It's a for-profit enterprise, although we're not always sure that's the case, but it should be a for-profit enterprise because we need to fund the next generation of research, which is also going to be expensive and time-consuming. So ultimately, the products that we make, it's not a scientific exploration only. The intent is to have a clinical and commercial impact. And that ultimately is what we're here to talk about this evening with you and with this panel. So my first question for the panel really is, as you take a step back and look at the landscape today, many of you have been involved in this field for decades, some of you. I'm not looking at you, Aaron.
Not all of
It's not my math, but anyway.
Mine either.
But take a step back and give us a state of kind of where we're at. You know, we're kind of, I think, through maybe CGT 1.0. We've sort of seen therapies come to market through the development cycle. We've seen them be launched. We've seen them some of them are 7 or 8 years into their launch trajectory. Last year, we treated 10,000 patients as an industry with the approved cell therapies, mostly in the US. What is the kind of state of affairs, as it were? I mean, we know, obviously, so the macros haven't been great since 2021. But on the therapeutic development side, what are we seeing scientifically? What are we seeing therapeutically? What's the current state of affairs? Who wants to handle that one first? Aaron, you do.
Sure. I think one thing that excites me, obviously, is the transition from purely treating hematology or oncology and moving into other diseases such as immune modulated diseases, autoimmune, etc., which has been something where that's where Quell is, and that's what we do with our Tregs. And so I think that's really important because it's expanding the potential demand, and it's going to force some changes in the value chain and how we do things because, as you and I have talked for a long time, just scaling up from where we are. So there are some scientific drivers for us to have to operationally change the way we do things. So that, for me, is something that's truly exciting because, as you said, there's been some really tremendous, potentially curative performance of these drugs, and trying to move into different into other disease areas is really interesting.
And it brings along with it an amplification of the challenges we've seen in oncology.
Exactly, right? I mean, when we talk hematology versus even just going to solid tumor, that's, you're talking order of magnitude there, and then even potentially another order of magnitude or two when you start getting into the autoimmune space. So It'll break if we just continue doing it the way we've always been doing it, and I think that's good, right? That there's a burning platform there that I think is going to be really powerful for us to see the value, and in the next couple of years we'll start to see there's a couple products that are currently in clinical development in pivotal trials for autoimmune diseases, and once we start seeing that first one or second one approved, I think you'll start to people are really going to realize that we're going to need to make some changes and make some systemic changes now, or we're not going to, or it's going to fail as a modality.
Yeah. Bruce, if I can ask you, kind of on the topic of scientific excellence and how we kind of integrate the pieces together. Obviously, oftentimes we develop research is separate from development separate from translation separate from process development. And also within a workflow, you see unit operations kind of existing in isolation. Why is that not the path forward for cell therapy? What do we do about that now?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and I love the fact that you differentiated research from development from translation. A lot of times they get blurred. R&D is a vastly different universe. One of the challenges with cell therapy is that if you make a change in one of the unit operations and you measure it at the end of that unit operation, you're probably not going to learn the penultimate or even the ultimate fate of that cell. And so the concern is, unless you're looking at the final product, you may not understand what's happening when you make a process change. Now that makes process development really challenging because you make a tweak on day one and you have to wait 7, 10, 14 days to understand the impact. That creates a much longer development cycle and it creates a much more expensive therapy. So I think being thoughtful about measuring things that are correlated to final product are important. So now thinking through, if I'm doing something that impacts cell viability, that should flow through to the end of the process. If you're doing things that impact cell phenotype, that's where you really need to be careful to understand the downstream impacts of that unit operation. So I think unlike historical biologics where you can optimize washing steps or capture steps in isolation, it's much harder to do that when it's therapeutic.
Yeah. How can we, and this is maybe Lucy, if you don't mind addressing this question first. You're working with Aaron and the Quell team at your site in the UK. How do you work together as a team to try and minimize some of the inefficiencies that we've just been talking about? This idea of bringing a more integrated approach, thinking about ultimately if you're doing process development, oftentimes you wouldn't be, and historically you wouldn't be worried about, let's say, cost of goods or other things, but now preclinical, we're starting to think about some of those issues.
Yeah, sure. I think using Quell, if you don't mind, as an example,
Sure.
The eXmoor business model is a little bit unusual in that we have a 20-year-old consultancy business where we engage with people really at the early spin-out stage to start to think about the age-old saying of designing with the end in mind. And actually, through having those touch points throughout the maturation of a company, it's meant that as we've bought this CDMO service online, we really understand the client, understand their end goals, we understand as much as we can of their process, but we also understand that they are the experts in their process, and that the way to make manufacturing successful is to do that in partnership. And so we've worked really hard to develop a partnership model whereby we have a shared vision, a shared goal, which is ultimately to get these products successfully to patients as quickly as possible. And we share the problems as well as the solutions. And that takes a really different mindset and a lot of dedication from both sides to work together for that shared success.
I think of all of us, Magdi might have the hardest job trying to wrangle investigators to think about some of these issues very early. So Magdi, describe to us a day in the life. Like, how do you get the scientists and investigators who are involved in early research to start to think about some of these issues early on?
Yeah, I think it's a big challenge because it involves a lot of education about how what you're doing on the bench will not be the final process that you are doing for the patients. And this is what created my position in Mass General, so that this kind of lack of bridging between the bench and the bedside side, and we're lucky to have like a big program where we have running our own clinical trials. And it's usually in this, we have like 2 points that are very challenging when we are uptaking projects from a small scale, non-optimized process, and we want to change this to a scalable, optimized process that can be first tested in human, and then also moving from the process development to a CDMO or a GMP, academic GMP facility, where we sometimes find out that everyone do things slightly different. I agree a lot with the point that you don't know the impact of slight changes because you have to wait until the end of the production, and then the other thing that I think is challenging, that we don't fully capture all the unique aspects and unique characteristics of the cells that we're working with and the product that we're working with. So we don't know fully if these changes or these tweaks will impact the final product. So when we are transferring projects to scaling up and manufacturing, this is usually what we find very challenging.
The topic of platforms and automation and tools to help some of these issues along when you're not having a bunch of researchers in a lab making the process anymore. The question always comes up is, what's the right time? What's the right time to think about standardization? What's the right time to think about automation? I think everyone's got a different point of view a little bit. I was on a panel less than the last year or so. There was some disagreement around the exact timing. I think actually Mark was on this panel with me. But there was definitely agreement that needs to happen before phase 3. Like phase 1, 2 is the latest you could possibly make these kinds of changes. But process development is probably the right time. I don't know, Bruce, if you would agree with that or have a different point of view.
Well, yeah, I hate to say it depends. But I mean, one of the misnomers, in my opinion, of automation is that you need automation to be successful. I think that blanket statement is relatively true, but I think automation should be used to solve a problem. So when you encounter a problem, you're going to want to make sure. Can you hear me now? I'm muted. It was a wrong answer.
Yeah.
What I was saying is automation should be there to solve a problem, whether it's consistency, whether it's a bottleneck in throughput, whether it's an operational question. I think you should employ automation where you have clear line of sight to the problem and how to solve it. Thanks, Mike. So for me, I think thinking about automation, it becomes a time in which you have enough understanding of the product and the process that you won't impact it by automating it. So early automation is important if you think it's going to have an impact to your product. If you don't, then I think you're able to wait a little bit longer, certainly before you put together a registration package. Right? You want to make sure product going into the patient is as close to the product that will be made under the commercial license. And that's probably the right thought process as you back up. I know enough now to do it, or I don't know enough, so I need to ask the right questions. And then I can automate what I understand coming out of that development process.
To me, it often seems like we're making potentially a false dichotomy between standardization / automation and flexibility. We feel as though it's a requirement that we give up one to gain the other. Because what I hear you saying, Bruce, which I fully agree with, is we can't sacrifice our flexibility. We need the ability to adapt and change based on what we learn about our process. And so we can't afford to sacrifice that flexibility. But we need to ensure that when the time is right, that we can standardize and drive a repeatable process. Is that a reasonable summary?
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I think what you don't want to do is automate for the sake of automation, right? Because then you'll automate the inefficiencies and
Automating
things that
efficient process.
Yeah, exactly. It'll make your process feel better, but it won't provide any lasting benefits. So once you understand your process and you're able to control it, I think that's when you deploy automation.
Aaron, you've had some experience with this, I know.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, I have to say, like, I've been automating things for my entire career, and I couldn't agree more. Right? If it isn't process first, right? Process in any way you the scientific process, business process, whatever. Applying automation just for the sake of automation, or assuming that that is going to solve it, you just fail more effectively. I think that there's a bunch of things here that are important. I think standardization in terms of platform, whether it be an automated platform or just a standardized platform, is a great way for organizations to save time. But I always say that ultimately platforms are notional. In the end, processes have, like, products have their own processes. And we've done a lot of work with eXmoor on this as well, on what our standard platform is. And it makes it more effective in manufacturing, et cetera, because each product is more similar than dissimilar. But in the end, we execute for each one based on a platform, but it's its own process, and I think it's important. To the automation side I think your point is a good one, which is if you get in way at the beginning, you can get that flexibility if that's the standard platform you've gone to. I think the hardest part that we continue to be that we're dealing with right now is a lot of companies started in a non-automated fashion with tools and approaches that were not automated. And the bar, the cost, the complexity, the risk to automate is really high right now. So I would actually say in some cases, I hate to say it, maybe it has to be post-approval and there's risk there. But if as a company I'm going to bleed out and not have enough cash and make it there, the answer is we're probably going to have to deal with some inefficient processes just to get there. So it back to Bruce's point, it kind of depends. But the earlier you make that call on a particular platform, however automated or not, the easier it is to gain those efficiencies. If you utilize a platform, it's always harder changing wherever that is midstream. So get back into to Magdi's point, go back to the PIs in academia and get the changes there. By the time you're already out in the commercial world or in industry, in many ways, like, the horse has already left the barn, and it's hard to do.
And one thing that's come up quite a lot recently in conversations I've been having is around the comparability bar of if I wanted to make manufacturing improvements, as you just said. Right now there's a lot of uncertainty. Perceived bar is very high. There's a lot of risk perceived without even thinking about it, much less doing it. But the other side of that coin is we're using processes that were invented 2 decades ago to treat patients today. And what other industry would we be locked into technologies and little t platforms, methodologies that are 2 decades old? It doesn't make any sense. So I think there's a call and ask for some regulatory innovation and guidance around how do we improve processes along the way such that we can take advantage of innovation while still delivering safe and effective medicines.
Can I just challenge one thing? Because to that point, it's much better today than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago in terms of regulatory uncertainty.
It doesn't mean it's good.
No. But I think there's the perception of that risk is far greater than what that risk really is, and that I believe that companies in particular have become risk averse in that, despite the fact there's clearer guidance now. And I think the other bit to that is the bar is high as to understanding your product and what the impacts are, just like we talked about. And I think, again, that's another capability that maybe companies don't have. So, but in the end, as long as you understand your product, that you can make those changes, as long as you understand what the potential impact is. And I think there is, as you said, it's not perfect, but I think that's a crutch that companies use to just out of hand say, well, we can't make that change because comparability. I remember doing this years ago before you started getting FDA guidance, et cetera. I'd feel a much better place today to be able to just say, we've got a plan, let's go talk to an agency, and we'll really do it. So I would challenge everyone to not use that as a cheap excuse.
So just add to that, I think you indicated earlier, indications are changing, markets are changing, the amount of these therapies that are going to come onto the market is changing. Technology will change to support that. So I think what works today isn't probably going to work in 15 years' time, and that technology is not ready for us yet. So we're going to have to be brave and make those changes when appropriate.
Yeah, and I think some of the lack of success we've seen with commercial products often gets driven by being unable to adapt a process to be more standardized, less expensive, whatever the things might be that might drive some of that commercial viability, sort of leveraged and kind of hamstrung by decisions that were made a decade ago in development.
Yeah, and I think I would add that there's a wealth of new tools and technologies being developed, but they're in development. They're not commercially available to deploy into the GMP environment. And I think that's where some of this risk comes from. I can do a 9-month development program, I can do the comparability and the bridging, but I don't know if that technology will be commercially available on my timeline. And I can't risk delaying because I'm running out of cash, et cetera. So there is now this uncertainty because a lot of new technologies are being developed and they look really interesting and they could help the industry move forward. But the uncertainty around, is there enough cash, is the runway there, is there a commercial strategy that's going to be viable, I think also gives people pause as they're developing their go-to-market strategy. So I think that's where a lot of people stutter a little bit and say, well, is it worth the risk? And I don't know that we have a good answer to that yet.
And that's part of the reason that we went through the advanced manufacturing technology designation process, is to say, let's put this in front of the FDA, let's let them kick the tires, let's have them look under the hood or the bonnet, depending on where you're from. And then they said, yeah, I mean, this meets the requirements that we've set forth for advanced manufacturing technologies. To hopefully lower that perceived bar a bit, maybe not fully, but a bit, to say the FDA's looked at this thing, and that's helpful. So we've explored a little bit on scientific excellence, we've explored a little bit on technology and impact. The other piece that I wanted to touch on was really around collaborative models. So we've got a couple CDMO representatives up here, therapy developer, and an academic institution, all maybe looking at that partnership from a different angle. So maybe, Lucy, if you don't mind, just speaking to kind of how eXmoor approaches these kind of partnerships, and if you'd like to use Quell as an example, as long as Aaron's okay, or you guys can talk about how that partnership came about. And
So I think just for eXmoor, we've got a few different partnership models that we're executing at the minute. The first is our academic strategy, so that is engaging really early on with academics that are developing therapies, pre-spin out, pre-funding to help them develop their CMC package alongside that, and to get involved with these companies really early and to be able to support them. The second is, with other people who want to provide similar services across the globe. So there was an announcement today of our partnership with SBS in Thailand, and we're really trying to support SBS in developing credible cell and gene therapy offering for Thailand. And so that's using the expertise and the knowledge we've gained in everything from facility build to operate the CDMO, to get them up and running and to be able to deliver services there. Where we don't, I think, have where we're continuing to explore is like technology partnerships and working with different people with different manufacturing technology to see how we can integrate that into our processes. But obviously, our most successful collaboration today has been the work that we've done with Quell over the last 6 years, and that's been everything from being QPs on their products that are produced in London to having interim posts in the company, to do some cost of good analysis, and then that relationship was well formed and mature, and when Quell looked to bring on a CDMO, we were not licensed at that point. We built the facility, we were going through building the team and getting our clinical manufacturing license, but the relationship and the trust and the partnership, the roots of it were already there, and it felt really comfortable to sort of go on that journey with somebody that we knew and that knew us well and trusted us to be able to work, and had exposure, I don't want to put words in your mouth, to the way that we, the openness that eXmoor works with.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important aspect of this collaboration, is that it didn't just start when we signed a contract to do manufacturing services. I think that's an important thing, and actually, even back to eXmoor has been instrumental in our CMC strategy, developing what our process development strategy and our platform works. So I think that's been really critical for us. But I think, just on the manufacturing side, I think the key for us is, as Lucy said, we already had a good relationship, a really good working relationship between the companies. And we looked at it, it's not a pure fee for service. Yes, we're paying eXmoor to do things, but and that's important. However, this is a shared project. There's no I in team. There's no one organization wins while the other loses. Either patients get product, right, and that's what success looks like, or they don't. And so I think we went in, to Lucy's point, we went in eyes wide open as to that it was a journey together, and that we were going to do it together. We weren't going to stand on principle and say, oh, I'm sorry, you have to do this and I have to do this, and we're not going to help you do things. We're just going to beat the table and say, why haven't you done this? We work together closely. And in the end, it really starts from a good relationship between me and Lucy, and making sure that we're always aligned and that the teams are always aligned, and with that shared success model. And it's a model I've used at other places with other partners, and I feel that very strongly that is the key to outsourcing. I'll call it outsourcing product, is that shared approach, and clear governance, clear communication, clear responsibility, sure, but in the end, it's shared success. Yeah, and shared problem, right? And I think that's the openness of when we each have concern on our own side or on the other side, we bring it up and we have a conversation and we figure out how together to solve that problem.
It seems to me, Magdi, I bet you don't view yourself as a CDMO, but this kind of consultative approach, it sounds to me like true partnership. There's expertise being brought to the table from both sides. But is this something that you experience in your work with investigators, and really trying to bring them maybe expertise or perspective they don't have?
Yeah, I think this was the main part of when we started the process development lab, which is like less than 2 years in age. So it's very new, and one of the things that we tried to do when we started is I want to talk to technology developers and try to adopt new technologies early on, try to implement options for investigators, because I think there's no one size fits all, and I think each project is unique, and especially being at the early stage of development, we see a lot of novel ideas and challenging projects that one of the things that we thought about is I want to have the right solution for each project that comes in, and I cannot do this with the standard, I would say not standard, but the legacy technologies that are used right now for the commercial manufacturing. So we try to engage a lot with technology developers and adopt new technologies in the lab and make it available, and then educate the investigators about their availability, what are the capabilities, what can we do so that we can choose the right solution. So this is the kind of partnership we are thinking about that.
Makes sense. Bruce, you've been on both sides of this equation, from days in the therapy development side, but also at the CDMO side. It's no longer just big facilities and clean rooms and people in white coats.
Yeah, no, I think I've actually been on all three sides, so developer, academic, and CDMO. And I think the key, Aaron, you hit on it. You have to trust your partner. You have to understand that your CDMO partner is running a business, right? And you need that business to be in business to be successful. So I think coming to the table with the mindset of, here's the problem we need to solve together, here's how we're going to do it. Starting from that point makes success that much more likely, because both sides understand what they're trying to achieve. On the academic side, I think we're also looking at opportunities to introduce technology to get our academic partners accustomed to the transition from research to development, and to start thinking about introducing technologies and analytics very early. I think we've had a number of conversations with companies that have a flow cytometer of choice, and we have to move them to the ones that are more commercially friendly are QC friendly. And part of the argument is we need to run this assay hundreds or thousands of times. It needs to be simple. You know, could you use the LinkedIn peanut butter sandwich analogy where you're trying to write an SOP and have a child, you know, work you through that? It's not quite that extent, but you want something that's bulletproof and it's going to be repeatable. And so talking with your partner about, you know, is this piece of technology going to be robust enough to run on a regular basis? That's a trust conversation. It's a partnership conversation, and it should be the basis of building the relationships early on.
So in the last couple minutes, I wanted to ask each of you kind of a final thought. Lucy, I'll start with you if that's okay. As therapy developers come to you, thinking about some of these issues ahead of time, hopefully, sometimes not as far ahead of time as you might like, probably. How do you help them kind of prioritize what matters when selecting a partner?
I mean, I think for us, it's like the earlier we get involved in that journey that they're on, the better. The more we can understand the company, the drivers, the people that are involved, the product, the technology. And so, yeah, that's my advice is to get somebody involved early, let them go on that journey and then grow together and be successful together. It definitely feels a lot. If we understand the process, you know, our job as manufacturers quite often is to look at that new technology and assess it and to be those places where it is safe to test out that new technology and not disrupt your development timeline pathway. And I think as we grow as a CDMO and as we go on this journey with people, we want to open the doors to more technology and be that safe pair of hands for those people to test as well. It's not slowing them down.
Makes sense that not only we're trying to promote their success, we're trying to keep them from making mistakes that we've seen others make along the way. Magdi, if I can come to you, I'm looking more for Loffin's here, I think so there's folk from MD Anderson here. You're seeing a rise of CMC manufacturing expertise within the academic research context, academics medical center, and I don't think that's by accident. I think that's a reaction to some of the things we've been talking about already. And what role, from your perspective, what role do academics and clinical centers play in really shaping practice that reduce the likelihood or improve the likelihood of success, let's just call it success broadly, of these early programs?
I think early on when the academic center started to be involved heavily in manufacturing for first-in-human clinical trials, the goal was just to get the project out of the door. Just like, let's dose the first patient. Let's think of what will get us to that step. And I think this model worked, but now our ambitions grow that we want to now build a product that we are thinking of passing on and getting commercialized. And I think this was like, of course, with the early CAR-T products coming out from UPenn and everyone like now is hoping that and a lot of learning that we got through this exercise, that now we want to, when we are hitting the door for the first in human, that we are also thinking about that this process is scalable, it can be passed, it can be transferred to a larger scale operations. And I think this is what created like these opportunities in academic medical centers. But also like I'm hoping that we are going to see more research focused solely on manufacturing. We see not a lot of work. It's growing, but I'm hoping more to see scientific projects that are focused on manufacturing, understanding the process, understanding one of the things that is very fascinating to me is we defined some CQA in the beginning of this field, and until now I don't think that we validated that those CQA are the right ones that predict response. I challenge anyone to tell me like what viability will do what percent viability will translate to a complete response, or what percent CAR will translate to a complete response. So I think we need to understand the product more and to understand what actually drives the response in the patient. And this requires more work.
Aaron, I'll give you the last word as the only therapy developer up here. If you give one piece of advice to the therapy developers in the room, what would it be around this topic, particularly CMC manufacturing, commercial viability? Take that couple decades of experience, encapsulate it in 30 seconds or less.
I'd say I'd go with the covey, start with the end in mind. I think that's critical here. But I think also you, just like the CDMOs are running a business, you're running a business too. And so you've got to make choices that are right for the business. But I'd always say have a plan. You can't always execute on that plan the way you want to, but if you have that, the old story of what Monticello allegedly was designed such that it could be expanded over time and not a single brick never needed to be moved. And I think that's the way you need to do it. Too many companies don't think too far enough ahead, and so there's, to Bruce's point, you're changing methods, you're changing processes, et cetera. And it's okay to do that by design, but the more you start with the end in mind and have a good plan in place, you can also be opportunistic. And so that's what I would say. I know in this world where there's not enough money, it's easy to just look 2 feet in front of our face, but have a long-term vision, have a plan on how to get there, and then just be happy with each step, getting as close as you can to it.
Great, thank you for that. I think we've got some time for Q&A from the audience. I think Debbie's got a mic here, another mic in the back. Just go ahead and put your hand up, identify yourself if you don't mind, and fire away with questions.
I have the power, but not very well.
Okay, just if you hold it, kind of pull it over here. I think we got Chris Mason.
Yeah, hi. One area of manufacturing which never seems to come up is the starting material and good old apheresis. Now, my question to the panel is, does that give you a lot of variability? And if it does, why are we not addressing it in some way? Because that seems to be the sort of elephant in the room.
You guys heard
Do you
that?
want-
Who wants to
do you want-
take that one?
Bruce, go for
Bruce.
it.
I think, great, is my mic working now? There it is. Fantastic. I think one of the challenges, of course, is variability. We don't control the regimen that they see in often cases, and we haven't appreciated the variability because of the process variability. It's hard to separate that from starting material variability. I was going to use the analogy of I went in to get a haircut and told the person that made me beautiful, and they said, I got to work with this, right? You kind of have to work with what you have. The challenge becomes, how do you ensure a consistent process? And so your only variability becomes the starting material. I just don't think we've invested enough as a system in donor material or patient material characterization, but I do hear that coming up more and more often.
I think I know nothing about this topic, but other than to say that if we try and do the same thing every time to a variable input, we're going to get a variable output. So what if we were to be able to adapt our process to try and drive to the same standardized output? And I know that sounds, for all the regulators in the room, like lunacy, and not at all GMP, but within a framework, an adaptive manufacturing process could help drive to the same outcome, which is what we all want. That's why we would want to standardize the upfront input as well as the process.
So can I just add one other quick thing to this? I think obviously one of the issues is just availability, right? I think every developer I've worked for, every developer I know has the same problem, which is they can't get representative material. And so when you're doing process development, it's small enough N that it's really hard to, again, figure out where the variability is coming from. I would agree there's more work that needs to be done, but there's, again, a kind of a structural thing where there's lots of companies out there, don't get me wrong, that will tell you that they will source your stuff, but ultimately you need patients who are willing and able to give material to be able to do that work. So you do the best you can. We do the best we can getting disease state material, but in the end, I need more N either in development or in GMP production to be able to characterize that in any way, shape, or form. I think that's one of the things that hamstrings us very early on.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you just
Yeah,
identify
thank you.
yourself, please?
Henrik Andersen, I work with Dellen Ventures. I know beforehand. And there's one statement that I agree with, but also kind of concerns me about the area in general, and that's saying, you make a change in some new operation, and we can't really tell what that change means until we get to the very end. And then the comment about the CQAs is like, well, we probably can't really maybe understand until we get into the patient, right? That becomes very ineffective way of doing process optimization. Right? So what do we do to create better scale-down models and generate more qualitative data? And I guess what are you doing at Quell? What is ORI doing to address that? Because we can't run every single experiment at scale. Right? I mean, we can take the 8, we can probably get like 3 or 4 experiments, but we should get 100 experiments. Then we can do qualitative analysis. I don't know if anybody has any, ideas about their approach to addressing that issue.
I'll let you take that one, Aaron. That's the easy one.
I mean, the best I can say, and I wish I could say it was perfect, but yeah, we do several different scaled-down models that we have that our PD team use to be able to, again, do things at a smaller scale, because exactly right. Our process is a long process. Heaven knows no one wants to wait 2 weeks to get data. But they're imperfect, and I think to your point, you've got to have the right CQAs. You've got to be able to measure the right things, then be able to characterize your product. So to have the scaled model that is, as you said, that is appropriate for you. So for us, it helps in terms of phenotype and cell expansion, et cetera. And that part is good, but some of the other, obviously, things that we would worry about in terms of CQAs, it's not effective for them. But right now, for where we are, I'd say it's good enough. We've done that. I shudder to think where we would be if we didn't have those scaled out models. I would say, because otherwise PD at scale is really expensive.
I mean, one of the ways we try and deal with that is to not actually do the experiments, to do it in silico, to model it. Use AI, ML tools, so create a digital twin of a process, run thousands of iterations, learn from that. So you've at least eliminated some of the sources of variability or some of the variables in your process before you ever get into the wet lab. And that's one of the ways you can try and minimize. It's going to happen, but try and minimize the number of variables you have to try and deal with.
This is Kumar Kardimpudi from Moffitt Cancer Center. Great discussion, guys, and great panel. My question is, what's the right time to bring automation into manufacturing? From my perspective, when we make the product, I want to put it in the culture, come back after 14 days, take it out and give it to the patient. But that's not ideal. That's not how you can do it. And Bruce alluded to this. You need to know your process before you automate, right? So from your perspective, what's the right time to automate your process so that you treat as many patients as you can?
In my unbiased opinion, you want my unbiased opinion? I think as long as you're not sacrificing flexibility, you should do it as early as possible. Because that gives you the runway to then not worry about that anymore. And then if you need to go back and iterate, you can still adapt. But if you're sacrificing flexibility, it's probably PD as latest as you can. You have to develop your process on what you're going to test in the clinic. You can do it when you're in the clinical trial. It just gets harder. So ultimately for me, you need better tools to be able to adapt your process, to standardize it, and then to scale it. And so that's really what we try to do at ORI, is to deliver a flexible tool that can deliver that for our partners. And then you make the decision when to implement it. But our recommendation is as early as possible, because that's just one less thing you have to worry about as you move your program forward.
Yeah. I think from academic medical center perspective, I think we see a lot of turnover, we act as incubator for talents that are there to learn. So usually implementing automation helped us a lot in at least eliminating some of the variability that we are seeing. So from my perspective, especially for academic medical center, thinking about automation like early on while building the process and trying to implement this as early as possible might be crucial for success.
I think we would probably go with Q&A for the rest of the evening, but I know there's food waiting for us after we finish the session. We finished the session with the patient who I think is here. Gary, are you here?
Yes,
There it is. And is Meg here as well? Or? Wonderful. Okay, well, can we say thank you to our panel?